The village lay buried beneath snowdrifts. Days were short, nights were long, and hope was a candle flame against the encroaching dark. Each flickering breath becoming a question, each fading hour an accusation. They sought out Father Eberhard von Bassel, his face drawn and pale as parchment. Magdalena was gone. Their child was gone, and the priests knew, even as the villagers did not, that there was something in the forest that did not want to be found. Something hungry? Something that climbed from the earth to claim what was owed. Fear lent wings 2 feet. Soon, the entire village was a flurry of activity. Men, women, and children racing through knee-deep snow to the edge of the woods. There, they stared at trunks so ancient they predated Christ, at roots that snaked through the frozen ground. Drinking, drinking, drinking. Someone cut their daughter's throat. Someone whispered, and blood ran down the tree like sap. Just as suddenly, they turned back, fear lending them speed. If it was out there, then it was with them. If it was there, then it was watching, waiting, hunting. Day barred their doors, bolted shutters, piled stones across thresholds. They huddled together in the meager light of oil lamps, praying, drinking, waiting. The priest stayed behind. Could promise to protect them. Now, he had to try to keep that promise. He went to the chapel, a sanctuary built for solace, but today offering only shadows and dust motes, dancing in the weak light, filtering through the stained glass. There, on the altar, stood a single silver chalice, its surface dulled with age. It was meant to hold wine, the blood of Christ. But today, it held water, the blood of the earth. Water from the very spring where Magdalena had fetched her final draft. The child was gone, but her absence was here, pressing against him, suffocating him. His hand trembled. Doubt coiled in his gut like a snake. Had he done right? Or had he condemned an innocent girl to become a monster? Then he saw it. The chalice, the water, the spring, all of it was stained crimson. With fresh blood, it was outside, but he felt its icy touch on his cheek. Why? Was this a warning or a promise? Whatever it was coming for him. And as the wind rose outside, whipping snow into frenzies, he heard something tap, tapping on the chapel door. He didn't move. Let it come. Let it take him. He had failed his flock, failed his God, and failed himself. All he could do now was wait. He waited for what felt like hours, though it may have been seconds. Then, as the knocking grew louder, more insistent, a thought struck him, stark and sharp. Whatever was out there, it wanted in. It wanted him. But why? Why now? Why him? And then he remembered. The ghost was not merely a specter, a shade, a haunting. It was a revenant, a spirit risen with purpose. And he had interrupted it. Its purpose. He had taken the one thing it could not abide, the one thing it needed most, time. And now the clock was ticking. Back then, in the quiet of the mountains, people believed that sometimes the dead did not stay buried. They believed that every so often, a spirit would rise with a scream, a hunger, and a thirst for retribution. And so they took turns watching, listening, waiting. And in the eerie silence of the snow-filled night, their worst fears were realized. He opened the door. There stood a shape backlit by moonlight, tall, thin, impossibly still. It wore clothes, not of this century, and its face was hidden in the folds of a hood. It extended a hand, and Father Erhard saw what was written there, scrawled in letters that looked ancient and wrong. His blood ran cold. Gah! Even through the glove, he saw the bones beneath the skin, the fingers long and spidery, tipped with claws. Beneath the hood, nothing moved. Nothing breathed, but something watched. And then the creature spoke, its voice like stones grinding together. "Where's Magdalena?" it said. "She is gone." "And where's the chalice?" "I have nothing." "You lied?" The creature lunged. It was faster than any man. Before the priest could utter a prayer, it sank its claws into his throat, lifting him from the floor, suspending him in the air. The last thing he saw, the last thing he felt, was ice. Not the bite of winter wind, but the cold seeping up his spine, seeping into his soul, stealing his life, draining his warmth. It was the coldest thing he had ever known. Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to another episode of the No Sleep Podcast. I'm your host, and this story was written by Daniel Mills. It was originally published on Reddit's No Skut. They searched the woods first. Of course they did. They combed through thickets and frost-bitten brambles, calling her name, until their throats bled. Magdalena, sweet Magdalena. No child had ever run so fast, nor disappeared so completely. There were no footprints, no blood, no screams. Only one thing remained left behind in her strassed bed like an omen. A single, freshly plucked tooth, small and white, resting on her pillow as though placed by a careful hand. The villagers began to murmur, "Cut!" Some spoke of wolves, though none had been seen in Schwarzhugel for years. Others whispered of travelers' bandits, perhaps, or worse. But the old women, the ones who still laid salt in their thresholds and never left scissors open overnight, they knew. They remembered. It had happened before, twice before, to be exact. In the year of the Black Frost, a child named Lucas disappeared. And a decade before that, a boy named Elias. Both vanished without trace. Both had been last seen speaking to someone no one else could see, and both disappearances occurred precisely 20 years apart, just like Magdalena. Father Earhart remembered too, but, unlike the others, he did not speak of it. He merely shut the chapel doors and fasted for 3 days, praying beneath the crucifix until his lips cracked and his knees bled. He dared not confess what he had begun to suspect, because if he was right, then the village's salvation had not come through Greta's execution. It had only fed something older. Bell. On the third night, the church bell rang of its own accord. The villagers gathered in the dark, clutching lanterns, their faces hollow and pale. The bell tower was empty, the ropes untouched, and yet the ringing continued slow, deliberate. At dawn, something was found at the chapel's threshold. A wooden doll? Bah! Not just any doll. It was carved in the likeness of a child Magdalena's yellow hair, her crooked left tooth, the mole under her right eye. The figure's chest had been hollowed out, and inside, coiled like a snake, was a lock of real human hair. Her hair. This time, it was not the priest who spoke first, was the blacksmith's wife, Hilda. A woman feared for her temper and respected for her memory. She recalled a legend from her grandmother of a walled mother, a forest mother, a spirit, perhaps a demon, that fed not on flesh, but on the soul's imprint, on memory itself. It could not be killed, but it could be bound. Every 2 decades, it required a vessel, a ghost, a revenant, a dead anchor through which it might enter the world for just a sliver of time. And when that vessel grew weak, it demanded renewal. Perhaps Greta had been such a vessel. Perhaps Magdalena now was. And if so, execution would not stop it. It would only drive it to find another skin. The people refused to believe. Could not believe. They clung to crosses and reason and denial. But that night, the miller's wife slit her own throat in her sleep, her blood soaking the pillows like red wine. She had never before shown signs of madness. Her husband found her body still warm, and written on the wall, in something black and sticky, were 3 words in a child's handwriting. "I am back!" Panic took root. Some fled. Most locked their doors and burned their icons. But a small group led by Hilda, the blacksmith's wife, turned to an older solution. They did not seek to destroy the spirit. They sought to trap it. And for that, they needed bait. Father Erhard protested, screamed, wept, but he knew it would happen, with or without him. So when the doll was returned again the next day, this time with a tiny red-stained dress, he agreed to perform the ritual. A circle was dug into the snow behind the chapel, ringed with iron nails and willow branches soaked in animal blood. Crude effigy of the walled mother was built. Half woman, half tree, with thorns for teeth and eyes made of burned bone. They placed the doll in its chest, and they waited. And that is the end of the story. If you enjoyed this terrifying tale, please subscribe. We'd also greatly appreciate it if you could leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. It helps us a lot. You can also check out our new channel, where we publish extra content, including a podcast all about writing with me. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next time on the Nossley Podcast. The snow stopped falling. Winter deepened. It no longer fell like a blessing from the sky, but like ash, caught. And Schwarzhugel, too, had turned quiet. Not peaceful, but stunned, like a creature holding its breath. Days turned to weeks. Magdalena was no longer spoken of. Her name turned to ice between the villagers' lips. They no longer spoke of her, not of the doll, not of the whispering in the walls. They no longer spoke at all. But something ancient moved unseen beneath their floorboards, gathering strength. The doll was placed in a glass reliquary beneath the chapel altar. Its limbs no longer twitched. Its eyes remained shut. But people swore, in the hours before dawn, they heard whispers coming from the stone floor, rhymes in a child's voice, recited backward, always backward. Father Erhard did not eat. He did not sleep. He spoke only once, when Hilda found him kneeling before the relic. "I held her," he said, and it was warm. From that moment, the priest refused the altar. He began scribbling furiously in old books. Grimoires, apocrypha, and codices, burned by the church but secretly copied, and preserved by mad monks and mourning mothers. He searched for a pattern, a reason, a weapon. What he found instead was a precedent. In the margins of a 13th century penitential from Bohemia, there was a passage barely legible about a heretic town called where spirits were summoned to stand trial. Not just spoken of, not banished with incense and Latin, but summoned into court, bound by ritual law, and made to answer for their crimes. The logic was twisted, yes, but elegant. If a ghost had a jinx, it had guilt. And if guilt could be proven, then judgment final and eternal could be passed. Not by God, but by man. Erhard took this madness and wrapped it in scripture. He called for another gathering, not in secret this time, but in proclamation. A public trial? Not of Magdalena, not of Greta, but of the spirit itself. They called it simply Das Ding, the Thing, for no one dared give it a proper name. The chapel was converted into a courtroom. Pews were torn out. Bah! A circle of consecrated earth drawn upon the stone floor, ringed with crushed bone, thorn wood, and 7 drops of innocent blood taken from lambs that had never seen moonlight. A wooden chair was placed at the center of the circle, not for show, for sentence, and behind the altar, veiled in mourning black, sat the doll. It was madness, and yet no one laughed. Could. Even the skeptics, even the drunkards who mocked the priest a week before. Nash stood in stiff silence, eyes hollow, as though they too had heard the tiny footsteps under their floorboards. 3 days before the trial, the blacksmith's youngest son vanished. 2 days before, her mother followed, her body found curled in the well, dryad, her arms wrapped around nothing. The night before, the chapel doors opened themselves. And so, on the morning of the trial, no one doubted. Not anymore. Father Erhard wore no vestment. He had abandoned his cassock, his collar, even his cross. He stood in plain wool, hands raw from salt and cold, holding the codex like a shield. Hilda acted as witness. The butcher as bailiff. The cobbler, nearly blind, was scribe. The air inside the chapel was heavier than stone. The priest began the rite with a reading not from the Bible, but from memory. A call not to heaven, but to the veil. He invited the spirit forward. There was no thunder, no flame, only a sound, a creak. The chair moved, and then formless, impossible a presence entered the circle. Not visible, but undeniable. It was not cold but wrong. A pressure behind the eyes, like grief sharpened into blade. Children in the back began to sob. One collapsed, and the Dalit's eyes opened and smiled. The trial began. Father Erhardt's voice never rose above a whisper. He addressed the Shernot, the doll, not the crowd, but the empty chair, with the full force of justice. "You are charged," he said, "with trespass against the bounds of life and death, with theft of innocence, with mockery of grace, with the binding and consumption of the soul of Magdalena, child of Anna and Lorraine." The candle flames leaned away from the circle. "You may not speak," he continued, "but your silence shall be your confession." The doll blinked once. Then something responded. A voice from nowhere, from everywhere, soft, feminine, but layered, as if 1,000 tongues spoke in unison behind velvet curtains. She came to me. The chapel shuddered. Hilda dropped her rosary. Erhard steadied himself. "You lie." The voice giggled. She asked. They all ask. "I give what you never could. Memory without pain, love without end." He trembled. "You feed, I heal," it whispered. "I sentence you," he roared, "to dispersal, to oblivion, to the end of your echoes." For a heartbeat, silence. Then the candlelight exploded into black smoke. The circle cracked. Something unseen lunged forward. The doll burst into flame but did not burn. Its body turned glassy. Its eyes glowed red. The pews behind Erhard splintered as an invisible force slammed against the altar. But the priest held fast. He stepped into the circle. The congregation screamed, but it was too late. Erhard seized the doll with both hands. His voice became thunder. "In nomen memoria, in nomen sanguinis. I bind the not to return." The doll cracked. The whisper became a scream, and then stillness, only the faint crackle of dying flame. Erhard collapsed. The doll was gone. Only ash remained. It was called the Black Mountain because the pines growing there turned a sickly color in the perpetual ash clouds drifting down from the volcanoes that choked the sky. Beneath the mountain lived a village named Schwarzhügel, which hadn't seen a sunrise in 30 years. Their story started like so many others, with a child who went missing. First it was Lena. Her mother had left the front door open for their goat, and the child had simply stepped out and vanished. When the search party found nothing, the priest told them that was a mercy. Better to be in the arms of the church than in the clutches of the hag that lured children up the mountain to live among the wolves. So they built a chapel and they prayed. And soon enough, another child disappeared. And then another. When the terrified villagers sought answers from their priest, he offered them a deal. A bargain with an entity that dwelt in the dark spaces between our world and the next. Power and protection in exchange for a sacrifice. After all, what are we if not what we worship? And so they made their pact. They used a clay doll to bind the spirit. And for 20 years, no child was taken. But then Father Erhardt grew sick, delirious. He spoke of a presence in his room that fed on his faith and the fear of his flock. And when he died, they believed the spirit had claimed him. So they performed a ritual to banish it, gathering around the corpse with burning branches and chanting Latin phrases the priest had written in his blood. For a brief, trembling moment, they believed it was over. The ash was swept into a sealed urn, buried beneath 7 layers of sanctified earth. Under the chapel floor, where no root or rain could ever reach, the villagers lit candles and sang hollow hymns. No one cheered. No one smiled. But there was, however, fragile a breath of relief. Father Erhardt was taken to his bed. His hands were burned, his eyes red-veined and distant, as if some part of him had remained in the circle, trapped with whatever he had cast out. Hilda watched over him. She did not speak of the trial. She simply placed cold cloth on his head and waited. 3 days passed. No children vanished. No whispers in the walls. No dolls. On the 4th day, the snows began to melt. But when the thaw came, it did not bring life. It unearthed something that should have remained lost. A woodcutter, returning from the forest's edge, stumbled into the village pale as bone, eyes wild. He had found, he said, a burial mound newly disturbed, as if something had clawed out from beneath. Inside was not a coffin, but a bundle of straw, shaped like a girl. Magdalena's name was stitched into its chest. When the villagers dug deeper, they found bones. Child-sized. Crushed. Mouth open in what could have been a scream. Wrapped in cloth not 20 years old. A second body lay beside it, smaller, still rotting. The woodcutter's own son. The implications were unbearable. Had the spirit never been inside the doll? Had it only made him think it was? Had they burned a vessel? Or a decal? That night, the bells rang again. No wind, no rope, just sound. And this time it wasn't just the chapel bell. It was every bell in the village. Every cowbell. Every sleigh bell. Every tiny silver trinket sewn into wedding dresses or hung from cradles. All of them ringing at once. Then came the scratching. Walls trembled. Doors bowed inward. The tavern ceiling cracked as something above dragged long, jagged nails across the beams. Not in rage, but in rhythm. A lullaby. Children wept. Adults did not move, frozen not by cold, but by the ancient paralyzing recognition that the dead had not been silenced. They had only been awakened. At the center of it all, Father Erhardt rose from his bed. Alone, unseen, he walked barefoot into the chapel. His hands wrapped in blood-soaked linen, his eyes no longer seeing the world as men do. He opened the altar stone. The urn was gone. No cracks, no signs of theft, simply gone. And in its place, resting atop the folded altar cloth like an offering, was the tooth. The same small, white, perfect tooth that had once lain on Magdalena's pillow, now blackened at the root, now warm. Erhardt did not scream. He did not pray. He simply sat, staring, as though trying to remember something he had never known. Something that lived at the edge of every page he had ever read, every prayer he had ever whispered. He remained that way until dawn. And when the villagers found him, the priest was seated upright in the pew, eyes open, lips stitched shut with strands of his own hair. Coo, On the chapel walls, written in soot, was a single phrase. "There is no execution, only exchange." They buried Earhart without ceremony, without cross, without hope. Hilda sealed the chapel doors with salt and chains. She told no one of the final message he had written, found in the margins of his codex. Scrawled in ink and tears, "We do not kill them. We become them." For weeks, the village held its breath. No one entered the forest. No one touched a doll. No one even whispered the names of the dead. And slowly, life returned. Children were born. Fields, bells grew quiet. But Schwarzhugel was never whole again, because every few winters, like clockwork, the snow falls in silence, and somewhere in the woods, footsteps begin again. Backward. Many years ago, perhaps decades, the name Schwarzhugel vanished from maps, its trails devoured by forest and fog. Travelers who stumbled near the region found only rotted signposts, rusted gates, and a silence that hummed just beneath the threshold of thought. No birds sang. No wolves howled. The village had become, quite simply, unremembered, except by one. Good. There's a house not marked, not mapped, half swallowed by moss and root, where a woman lives alone. Kug. Some say she is a midwife. Others say she is a witch. Her name's Hilda, though even she has forgotten her surname. Her hands are calloused, her eyes clouded. But she still lights a candle each dusk and places it by the window, an old habit, or perhaps an offering. She speaks to no one, except the snow. When it falls, she whispers. She tells the snow everything she remembers about the trial, the doll, the priest whose soul bled into scripture, about the bells, about the laughter, about the face of the girl who was once named Magdalena and whose voice still lives in the wind that slips beneath doorways. Hilda has seen it again. Not the doll. Something worse. A child. Pale. Barefoot. Standing at the edge of the trees. Always watching. She never moves. Never blinks. She is not ghostly but solid. As though carved from memory itself. And sometimes when the snow is just right, Hilda hears a second pair of footsteps behind her own. But there are no shadows. There is no breath. There is only the echo of something very old. They called it Das Ding. Yes, but the name was wrong. Names are for things that begin and end. This never did. There are records stuck into forbidden libraries, whispered among mad theologians and apocryphal historians about other villages. Other places, small, silent hamlets that vanish without trace. Their wells dry, their altars cracked. Always after a trial. Always after someone dared to judge the dead. One tale from 1631 in the southern Pyrenees speaks of a congregation that exhumed and burned the body of a bishop suspected of returning as a wraith. A month later, the stone baptismal basin bled for 9 nights, and a child was born with no eyes but could recite Latin backwards. Another from Poland, 1704, tells of a midwinter hanging of a phantom beggar whose shadow remained on the gallows for 12 days. The executioner's daughter vanished on the 13th. The town burned on the 14th. No survivors. Good! And then there are those who say the entity never needed victims. Only belief. Good. The act of recognition was the first invitation. The second was fear. The third was the trial. For, in attempting to judge the ghost, we gave it form. Could. In attempting to execute it, we gave it life. Some say it is not a spirit, but a mirror. A reflection of humanity's failure to bury what haunts us, grief, guilt, regret. That what returns is not the dead, but what the living cannot forget. That every doll buried, every effigy burned, every ritual performed with trembling hands, only feeds it, Because execution is not about justice. It is about spectacle. And nothing hungers more than that which lives in the space between the story and the silence that follows. And so we return to the village no longer stands. The chapel is dust. But still, the bells ring outwardly in places where no one should be. And still, the children vanish silently into snow that leaves no footprints. They tried to destroy the ghost, but all they did was give it a story. And now that you've heard it, it might remember you, too. But if you want to hear more tales of historical hauntings, of restless spirits, and unfinished business, Gridjewel's best left unsung and evil's best left unawakened, then perhaps you should wander deeper into the forgotten corners of YouTube. For tucked away in the catacombs of online history, there are other stories waiting to be unearthed. Stories of sacrifice and sorcery, of specters and revenants, of skinwalkers and doppelgangers, of gods both worshipped and reviled. And as the algorithmic winds shift and new subscribers are gained, perhaps some of those tales will find purchase in the light of day. Perhaps they'll stir and take shape. Perhaps they'll find an audience. Perhaps they'll find you. If you feel such stories stirring within you, if you hear echoes of the past and see phantoms at the edge of your vision, then come, take a candle, and walk with me through the dark. For history is always there. If you know where to look, what do you see? What do you hear? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want to see more, to help unearth more of these forgotten histories and bring them back to the light, subscribe to my channel. Until next time, remember, some doors are best left unopened. Some memories are best left undisturbed. And some things are best left dead.